2.
Well, how's everyone doing? Today is Saturday. It's 3 o'clock. Time for the Concerned Forum. And I am your host, Robert Gumbs. And today we're going to have a very interesting guest. Some of you may have had the pleasure of seeing Mr. Straharm before, Mr. David Straharm. But before we introduce our guests, I want you folks to realize something. I want you folks to realize that we are at a crucial stage in our country's history. For a long time, a lot of people would say, especially here in New York, many people would say, oh, well, I don't really have the need to get involved in politics. And, oh, well, that's those politicians up in Albany. Or that's those politicians down in D.C. Or that's those politicians in City Hall. Well, I think that after 7 months of what we've had down in D.C. in the White House, I would hope that most of you folks realize that in America, politics can no longer be looked upon as a spectator sport. We are on dangerous territory here, folks, and we need to start being realistic. Realistic in the sense that we need to start formulating some type of general plan of action. I say general because, of course, we all don't think alike. We all don't see everything the same way. But the important thing is that we recognize that there are some serious problems that need to be tended to. One of those is to start holding our elected officials accountable. And I think that that's one of the problems that you find in many localities where it's represented essentially by one party, where you have a one-party rule. Now, don't get me wrong, that can be a good thing depending upon the party. But also, sometimes it breeds a certain amount of complacency, a certain amount of laziness that people who are in office might get the feeling that, well, I really don't have to make too much noise. I really don't have to do too much because of the fact that I'm in office. I am, say, a Democrat. This is a Democratic area, and I don't have to worry about anything. Well, that's just plain out wrong. We have a multitude of problems here in this city that must be dealt with. Homelessness, housing, the whole homelessness housing thing. The problem about education. The fact that you have a certain small group of people who are trying to privatize everything and literally kill the public sector. And you take that spirit of privatization, add to that the nonsense that we have with President Trump and his, supposedly business-friendly administration. And you have to ask yourself, what happens in a country where you go out of your way to destroy the public sector, as is being done here in the United States? And finally, on this note, let me also say this. Especially in terms of people of color, we need to stop acting like we are orphan children. You know, this business of the way too many of our leaders conduct ourselves. We have to stop asking and start demanding. And you know, the thing that people of color and low-income, working-class white folks, the thing that we have in common is this, I don't know, an attitude. Like we're asking someone to do us a favor. Nah, it's not about favors. You're an American. This is owed to you. And one of the problems that we have is that we are it's too easy to quantify people based on race, because that is something that has been used against working class people. You allow corporations, billionaires, to basically live free off the government. But when you fight for something that's supposed to be basic, just human needs, you act like you're begging someone to do you a favor. And that's totally the wrong attitude to live in a democratic republic. Why is Flint, Michigan still, why are those people still having to drink dirty water? I mean, of course, I'm quite sure they don't drink it at all. But I'm just saying, why are they not entitled to a decent, safe water supply? Something like that should be taken for granted. And see, this is the point that we need to get across. People of the working class, and yes, I do use that term class, because you do have a class system here in America. As much as that term class annoys us or makes us feel, un-American, we have to deal with reality. There are certain things that are basic human needs, human requirements. You need to start asking the people who you vote for and put into office, why is it that every other country, every other industrialized Western country on the planet has these certain basic things: education, clean water, a certain level of decent housing, health insurance. Why can they have it? But yet we, living in the mightiest nation on the history of this planet, why can't we have it? When you start demanding answers to those questions, then you know that you're putting your feet on the correct path. As I said earlier, we have a guest, Mr. David Strong, and I'm not even going to take the next hour, 2 hours, 3 hours to talk about all that this man has done, okay? Because we don't have the time, unfortunately. That's how many accomplishments this gentleman has. But let's just say, just to skim off the surface, you're talking about a gentleman that served his country as an officer in the Air Force. You're talking about a man who has been an educator. You're talking about a man that's an author. You're talking about a man that is an activist. And it continues.
As I think about what has been said in your narrative, it brings me to the point of the start back in the 17th century, the 1600s. And I am brought to think about Bacon's Rebellion. And the short version of this is at that time, the
Excuse me.
United Kingdom
Uh-huh.
was a major entity that would bring its own people over to what we call the 13 colonies, in this case, Virginia.
Yeah.
And Africans came over at that time in the early part of the 17th century, 16, 19, 20, and around there. And the Africans and the Europeans were workers in a capitalist system, and they worked together. And it got to a point of, we're skipping over all the details, where in 1676 and 1677, you had Bacon's Rebellion. And the ruling class, the oligarchs, who are at the top of the food chain, saw the situation where the Africans and the Europeans were getting together to the point where they were challenging the hegemony of the ruling class. And that's when the concept of white supremacy was put into effect. And one of the best books on that is the book by Theodore Allen, with the help of Jeff Perry, The Invention of the White Race. It's a 2-volume, if you want to really read about this.
The Invention of the White Race.
Yes, and it is invention. There's no such thing as race anyway, because everyone on earth is African. At one time or another, a relative came from Africa and went to many corners of the world, including Europe. So after going to Europe, the genetic makeup of the people who from Africa went there, and the environment, and eventually some of them turned to have the pinker type of skin. And that applies to whether you're going to Europe or China or Japan or whatnot. So we're all the same people. There's no white race and yellow and black. It doesn't exist. The same people. So if we take it to that, that brings us to now. And that's very important, because when the ruling elite, the oligarchs, saw that at the end of the 17th century, that's when they instituted these differences. They said, well, we're going to put in a system of divide and conquer, which is still in effect today. In other words, it started there when they saw the dangers of having the working class, those so-called blacks and so-called whites working together. So what they did was to create a system of some small privileges for the so-called whites, and that's in quotation marks, and they made a difference between the two groups, and we have that today. That still exists today. It has changes, but that's the base of this whole system. And that's the base of why this country and this capitalist country is able to be more successful and more wealthy than, let's say, some of the Scandinavian countries, because they didn't have the ability to do this thing to such an effect as being effective, divide and conquer, and that way enrich the ruling class and impoverish everybody else. So white people, they don't understand that white supremacy is against their interests, as well as so-called black people. It's against everybody's interests. And to emphasize that, just look at the fact that you have a handful of people who control nearly half the wealth in this country and income. Nearly half, a handful, maybe a couple dozen. And that shows you that we don't have exactly a democratic republic.
Well, you made the comment just now about successful. Now, I don't know if I'm going to have to beg to differ with you or not, because I would say that in terms of quality of life, Denmark, Norway, Scotland, even, places like that,
Yes.
they are far more successful.
I understand what
than
you're
we
saying.
are.
When I say successful, successful for the ruling class.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I want to be clear on that.
Okay.
I
That's
don't want
what
to
he meant. Yeah, okay.
Successful for the ruling class,
right. I understand
enriching
that.
themselves
I see.
to the point where they are now. Now, when the places you're talking about, the quality of life in those places is much better for the masses of people. The people are happy. They have a good social infrastructure for themselves in terms of justice, in terms of income, economy, in terms of health. All these things, they're doing very well. But over here, the people who are in charge here, the oligarchs, the top of the food chain, were able to play the people much better for their own interests, and is still working today.
See, now this is something that I first noticed when I was a teenager, and I went in the military for the first time. That was the Army, and we're talking back in 71, 72. And I had the opportunity to go to Denmark, Amsterdam, the Netherlands, Britain, Norway, and see, that's another thing. At that time in Europe, it was no big deal. If you're stationed in Germany, for example, you're living in Germany, and you want to go check out Denmark, or you want to go check out Sweden. Well, all you did, especially if you knew how to drive, you went on ahead and you rented a car, or like a few of us owned our own vehicles, and just take the drive into Denmark or over to Sweden. I mean, of course, you had, your papers and everything. Well, being a military, you had your military ID card, so that wasn't a problem. But if you happen to have been a West German citizen, well, you had your papers and you just traveled. It wasn't a headache, okay? And now some people will tell me, oh, well, what do you think now, Robert? You're fairyland. It's not like it was back in the day. And I tell people, listen, the main thing that has changed Europe is this fear of quote-unquote terrorism. I don't like to use that word. Maybe I'll tell you why later. But that is something to be concerned about, because people die. But if you don't understand the cause of factors, then you really just sound like a frightened child, and you don't know what you're really talking about, which unfortunately is the problem with so many people in this country. We, America, unfortunately, we are the ones that created those social problems for Western Europe. We did that because by going into Iraq and literally blowing up the so-called Middle East, we caused that problem. It was like a chain reaction, because it caused explosion after explosion. And finally, people felt that They were concerned about their safety, the safety of their kids, their families. And so they said, well, I'm getting the hell out of here. Look, you take Syria, for example. Well, yeah, people have fled Syria. Why? Because it's deadly, see? And, yeah, that has caused a problem in Europe. Actually, it's not. It has the problem that they have. I actually thought that it would be much worse than it has so far turned out to be. Which, don't get me wrong, they have mammoth problems, because what you're literally doing, you're taking one civilization and dumping it upon another civilization quickly.
Yes.
See? And that's bound to cause problems.
Well, this makes me think of George Bush, the last one, Bush
Junior.
43.
Yeah, Junior.
And
Okay.
someone asked him why you had so-called terrorists doing things, and he answered, I don't know if anybody remembers this, but he says, "Oh, they doing that because they don't like our freedom." You see, So what comes to my mind is that if someone is committing a so-called terrorist act against you, like some of the things that have happened, the first thing you should be thinking about is what grievance do they have against you for wanting to do the thing that they did in the terrorist function. So people do not think about all the things that the United States policy does to injure other people.
Yeah.
So when people are not nuclear armed and so forth, they do what they can. So that's how this whole case of terrorism comes back, it bounces back on people who they think are their enemy, and this is their way of getting back. So you never see that on radio or television, about why we should stop doing the things that we do to people in terms of damaging their wealth, and their income, and all over the world. And the fact that we have bases all over the world, and we're operating and killing people all over the place, and people are just getting back.
Well, I'm going to tell you, spending time first in the Army, and then some years later, going back and going in the Navy, and not just in the Navy, but having the opportunity to be assigned for 5 years to the White House and to the Pentagon, being in DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and dealing with the top secret issues and what have you, and being a few years older, I've had the chance to see things from different perspectives, and I don't think that people understand that what we have a foreign policy mechanism, and the American people, they have no understanding of what it's for. And see, that's one of the things that makes America so different from any other, quote, supposed Western democracy, because we are spending trillions every few years, right, on a mammoth military-industrial complex. And we're really not quite sure why. Now, I'll give you an example. This gentleman, and I use the term loosely, that we have in the White House, Trump, he swore up and down Bush Jr. was wrong, Bush Sr. was wrong, even Clinton was wrong. Obama was wrong. Everybody is wrong because they had troops in the Middle East. Now, after 7 months, he decides to do the exact same thing and then some that he cursed out Obama for. And see, what angers me especially is the fact that you are supposed to be, you claim that you were so different to these other folks, especially Obama. But you will not just come out and simply state what the issue is. The biggest problem that we have in the Middle East is Pakistan. That is the problem. Why are they the biggest problem? Because Pakistan has nuclear weapons. And their fear is that the Taliban or maybe someone else will take over that government in Pakistan and assume control of those nuclear weapons. But instead of leveling with the American people and just coming out and saying, hey, look, folks, this is the deal. We're worried about Pakistan. We're worried about the fact that that region has nuclear weapons. We're afraid that if we pull out all of our troops from the area, that would be a green light for, like I said, could be Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, or whatever, to take control of that government and take control of those weapons. What should happen, because you cannot unring a bell, you cannot put a genie back into the bottle, but what you can do intelligently is set up a commission made up of every nation that has skin in the game. France, Britain, the United States, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and yes, Russia as well. And basically you set up a commission. And with that commission, what you can begin to do intelligently is to downscale, basically, so that if the government in Pakistan happens to change, the issue of atomic or nuclear weapons will not be an issue. But no, we're spending billions of dollars every 6 months for stuff that we don't need, see, and engendering hatred that we definitely don't need. And see, that's the problem that I have with the way that we do military in this country. Because the United States should not be the world's policeman. The world should be the world's policeman. And it's my honest belief that we will never come close to having some kind of peace on this planet. Or put it this way, we will not be able to avoid these major wars once every 30 years or so until we have some kind of international arrangement where all nations, like I said, form some type of commission where the peacekeeping, especially peacekeeping in terms of avoiding a nuclear war, until we all have that commission and work together to lessen the possibility of some type of nuclear confrontation. Now, what bothers me, and I'm going to say this and I'm going to let you go, what this guy Trump has been able to do, you talk about unifying a country. And I don't give a damn how anyone feels about this system. We know all about the past, right? But when you're president, you have to at least make a semblance of trying to strive for some type of unity in the country. Because if you don't do that, then you're going to continue to have what you had in Charlottesville the other week. And what we have now is madness. And I get so burned up. I hear these people talk about, oh, well, he's a white nationalist. And, you know, white folks, white working class people feel that they have been neglected. Hey, you are neglected because of the fact that you put your stock in a way of doing politics that was against your own interest. And see, that's the problem in this country. Working class people for the last 30 some odd years have not worked or voted in their own best interest. Now, go ahead. I know you want to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, there's so much that you said that's important. You have to understand that the United States claims it's a democratic republic. Right. And that's important. It claims, right. Only claims. However, it is not. It is run by essentially a small oligarchy that control the politics, the economics, and the social policies that exist in the country. And I've mentioned before, the key factor is they have been very successful in their own interests of making divide and conquer since Bacon's Rebellion a fantastic art, and they are good at it. Now, Brother Gumbs mentioned how people vote against their own interests. Let's deal with that. No matter what the situation is, under those circumstances, the ruling class is able to manipulate people. And part of it is the fact that you have what I call one party, Republican and Democrat, that represent the same interests of those at the top. And they're able to manipulate people to vote against their own interests. Don't think that just because your interest is not what you're voting for, that people won't vote for it. People vote for a number of things. For example, even though the concept of white supremacy, which we talked about before, is not in the interest of white people or any people. There are some people will vote if they see that this is a white supremacist policy, and they'll vote against their own interests. So people vote against their own interests all the time. If people voted for their interests, you'd have a system of health care for people here that I think should be a system of health department that covers everybody. I don't like the idea of single payer, because what happens when you have single payer is that people will go.
You don't want single payer?
No, I'll tell you why. Let me finish.
Go ahead.
The single payer encourages people to do unnecessary surgeries and procedures. Whereas if you put doctors on salaries, they wouldn't be encouraged to injure people by doing unnecessary procedures. They do it all the time. Look what happens, for example, to women in this country, where they do hundreds of thousands of hysterectomies, many of them are not needed. Look at the example of people who want to do all kinds of surgery, like cataract surgery, like colon surgery, that's not necessary. I can think about even in my own case.
Well, hold on a second. No, hold on a second now, because you said that what we had before Obamacare was no good. People were being turned down for insurance.
Yeah, well, there shouldn't
be
medical care. Health should be a right.
Right.
Not that. No, I'm not.
We agree. Okay, well, we
taking
agree
away.
on that.
We agree with that.
Yeah.
I'm saying, as far as I'm concerned, everybody should have the right to health care and water and housing and things like that.
We agree.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the point is, the whole place is run not in the interest of the people. It's run in the interest of the oligarchs and people that run the country. Now, you mentioned things about war. The reason that we have all these wars is that they are very profitable. The people who have the contracts, and both you and I know about contracts, contracts for personnel, contracts for weaponry and other hardware, they make huge amounts of money. So they love warfare. What you know, if you want to make trillions of dollars, well, then you make fighter planes, you do all the things that go along with warfare. So this place is run by the people at the top, and all the Congress people and state and local legislative people. Many of them are crooks. They are pure crooks, and they respond to something called campaign contributions, but are nothing but bribes, and people don't get it. So that is what is happening, and that is part of the reason that they're so good at this. They can get people to vote against their own interests.
I've just clapped my hands. Mr. Strom, you are in charge. What would you do to change the present situation that we have?
First of all, I'd get to people and drill into. I know it's very difficult. Because the ruling class, the people who are the culprits here, control the so-called education. I put that in quotation marks. Most of it is not education; it's training. I was in the military. They don't educate the troops. You train the troops. And they do the same with the people, no matter what level you at, primary school, secondary school, or college, or tertiary. So a lot of people walking around with PhD degrees who know nothing. They don't understand the system. And if you don't understand the system, and if you don't know how to play the game, like the title of my book, then you're in trouble. And that's why so many people are in trouble. And that's why a lot of our folks are dying. They're so confused. And that's all colors. And that's what you're going to have when you don't have a draft, because they get the poor people and put them in the army. And the rich folks, the corporate heads, the people in Congress, for the most part, their children don't get on the front lines like in places Afghanistan, where we lost thousands of people.
Well, it's changed. See, this is something else that I pointed out to someone. World War II, it was a matter of not just patriotism, but also pride. A guy could not, rich or poor, he could not show his face if he hadn't served in World War II. It just wasn't done. First thing, after 1945, first question out of any prospective person running for any public office, what was his war record? what was his military record? Was he rich? Doesn't make a difference. You had to have one. And see, that changed. That's one thing that Vietnam did that really hurt this country. And I always tell people, contrary to popular belief, the left really did not make too many mistakes during the 60s and early 70s. As a matter of fact, it was during the 60s and 70s where people of color, women, the LGBT community, all those groups that I have mentioned, that's who they finally, for the first time, actually began to be a part of this American society. But one of the mistakes that they did make was when they put so much pressure that the government, and no, they didn't end the draft. The draft is still there. They just stopped using it. And I tell you, that was a mistake.
Well, as far as the draft is concerned, if they try to institute the draft and put it into effect, they wouldn't be able to do
no, not now.
The things that they're doing now.
Yeah.
You would have such an uproar here, but the point is, the draft is a poverty draft now.
Yeah, now it's a poverty draft.
Yeah. So,
but hold on a second now, because I want to get back to what you were saying about single payer, because I thought that most people that were fighting for national health care were in favor of single payer.
All right, so here's the way I feel about single payer.
Okay.
The point is, we don't want to have a system where the only way that the practitioner is going to get paid is by doing something, like doing an unnecessary operation, like promoting yourself in the New York Times that you do this, that, and that, the other surgery, telling people they got to have cataract surgery, telling people they have to have colon surgery they don't need, telling people they have to have orthopedic surgery that they don't need.
Right.
You know, in other words, the only way you're going to get paid is by doing these things.
Right.
Whereas the medical school that are in this country are run by the drug companies, they're run by the hospitals, the doctors, and the insurance companies, and the device makers. Medical schools need to change their curriculum. They need to make sure that they're teaching people how to have healthy lifestyle and how to stay healthy, not just treating sickness.
Okay.
Make sure people are staying healthy. They're knowing about nutrition. Medical schools don't emphasize teaching people about nutrition. This is very important for the health of all the people that live here. But you don't make any money by teaching people good nutrition or healthy lifestyle. You make money when they get sick, and that's what they're doing. And that's wrong.
Now,
and allopathic medicine is the type of medicine they teach in these schools. And that's drugs, surgery, and radiation. They need to teach some about natural medicine, natural remedies. But they don't do that because they make much more money selling pharmaceuticals. People don't even know that the drug companies, the pharmaceutical companies, know what every doctor prescribes. They have ways of finding out and leaning on doctors, giving them kickbacks, and doing all the type of things to prescribe pharmaceutical things.
Okay.
So we need a whole lot of improvement in this area.
Now, what about that elephant in the room? That elephant being, as we saw from Charlottesville, this business of working class whites, some of them actually, some of it is just they feel that this divisiveness, let me put it that way, I mean, with working class whites. What are you going now? How would you deal with that
Well,
as an elected official?
well, somehow I know it's a very, you see, white supremacy racism in this country, in the United States, is somewhat like the white on the rice. It is so ingrained. It is a very hard thing to deal with.
No,
So
okay.
I'm sorry that it's like that, but that's the state we're having. And it's so tragic because what it does is engender having extremely ignorant people not understanding the system they live in. They have no clue. I mean, how ignorant can you be and you don't learn anything? And the ruling class is benefiting from it. I'd say one possible thing is to try to teach them who benefits from these policies. If they could understand that all the things they're doing benefit certain people, and the people who are benefited are the people at the top. The war machine, the corporate executives who run these companies that make military supplies and whatnot, the contractors, the intelligence contractors. There's certain people that benefit by the divide and conquer of white supremacy and all that incredibly stupid stuff that you hear these people talking.
Yeah, well, you're right. It is incredibly stupid. That was a huge problem the first time that I was in the service. The second time, it was better. It was better, except for the last duty station, and that was in North Florida.
Yes.
And you know how North Florida is.
Yes.
You know.
I've been stationed there.
No difference between Mississippi and North Florida. You know. And it was sad, you know. It was sad, and what I see now, and see, this is what really ticks me off. This so-called president, and I do mean so-called, uses white supremacy to divide Americans. And I think that is so.
He's not the only one.
Low. Well, no, he's not the only one. But right now, he's the chief cheese. See, he's the head honcho. Mm-hmm. And for him to do something like that, I think it's incredibly low. It truly is. And when you look and you see the amount of working class white, especially working class white males, who are literally dying like never before. Do you know America is the only westernized country on the planet where men, in particular white men, are dying like flies in comparison to the rest of the world? Low income, working class white men are dying. And we're talking about dying guys, in their 40s, late 30s, right. 40s, see, 50s?
But the oligarchs don't care about that. The oligarchs, the people who are making the money in this society, don't give a damn about those dying white men. They care about their bottom line, which is profit.
Yeah, but see, then what happens, a guy like Trump comes along, and he tells these low-income, what's the word for health, poor health, poor condition, white guys, the reason your life is so screwed up.
I want to respond to your point.
It's that black guy over there. It's that Hispanic guy.
You need scapegoats.
Yeah, exactly.
But another part of what you're saying is very important because, you know, this means that in all cases like this, you are making the people feel good. In other words, when you point out those scapegoats and you're screwing them anyway, but you're pointing attention away from yourself. So the reason, that's part of the reason they go and vote for these people, because they're made to feel good, even though they're going against their own interests. That's the point that you were making.
Oh, okay.
They're going against their own interests,
yeah,
but they're feeling good by the responses of Trump and people like him.
That's a form of masochism, isn't it?
You might put it that way.
Oh, God.
But I know it doesn't make sense. But they love it. But I mean, it's a trick. In other words, these people don't know the game. The game is controlled by the oligarchs, and they make these people feel good, but they screw them on the other side. You see, so that's the way this place works. And all the things that are going on, the neoliberalism, as you mentioned in your narrative, in your intro, about turning things from public into private, that's all part of enriching the ruling class. So, you got private prison, you got private everything now, and they're trying to destroy everything that's public, and they're very good at it. And they can get these people, like you say, going against their own interests, but they're making them feel good. And that's what they're doing. These crazy people walking around with Ku Klux Klan suits and Nazi stuff and whatnot, all this dumb stuff, they can get them to function like that. You're not going to find any rich upper-class person walking around like that. So they get these little poor-ass, European people to do this kind of stuff, and they think they're doing something.
You have, unfortunately, you do have a lot of college types. Unfortunately, they're poor college folks, and they feel that they're going to, even though they have a degree, they're going to stay poor again because of you, me, the Latino brother, that white sister, that gay person. Okay,
right.
Where are the reasons? That person that works for the newspaper, it's because of us.
Yes,
that their life is in the crapper.
The point,
and that gets people killed.
Yes, the point is that the new people coming up now are not going to be better off than their parents.
Yeah.
They're worse off, and that's a tragedy. But also, as was brought up in a discussion I was in some time ago, it was mentioned that in every demographic, in terms of white people in this country, in the last election where Trump won the election, the white people, the majority of them, voted for Trump. See, now that's regardless of the education level, male, female, all of them still voted for Trump. So that tells you that Trump, as bad as he is, he's got a formula for marshaling a lot of power and getting these people to go and follow him.
Well, what we got now with the statistics, basically, you have a little less than a third, okay, are in Trump's corner. It's like about 33 to 35%. Mm-hmm. And the thing that, like I say, and I repeat, these folks actually they don't understand, or they don't wish to understand, that anytime that they support Trump, I'll give you a prime example. Now, I mean, I'm not going to get into the whole that deep into the Russian thing, okay, because we really don't have the time. But let me quickly say this. We know now, it's no longer a guess. It's not conjecture, all right? We know that Donald Trump basically sold this country out to the Russians for an election so he could be president, okay? too much. There's too many interconnecting dots. And even me, recalling the things that used to come across my desk when I was at the with DIA back in the 80s, okay? And the fact that he can't get money from American banks because he doesn't pay American banks back. So that's why he has gotten so much with Russian oligarchs. He doesn't pay workers. People do a job for them. He doesn't pay them. Or he pays them half of what he's supposed to pay them. And yet, working class white people would still vote for a guy like this, would still support a guy like this. And I'm like, are you insane? This guy doesn't give a damn about you. He says he doesn't want working class white people in his cabinet because they're too poor. This is your champion. This is what he thinks of you. And yet, this 33% of you still sing this guy's praises. And I think that that is so sad. You got a young man now, right? His life's just beginning, 20 years old. He is going to spend, if he is lucky, he might see 55 years of age out of jail. The guy at Charlottesville, and I saw the tape, he rammed his car trying to kill these people. And he did manage to kill that young lady. 20 years old. And his life is ruined. Because he believes so much in Mr. Trump's brand of white supremacy. And I say Mr. Trump's brand because Trump is the only president that we've had since Woodrow Wilson that the Ku Klux Klan cheered at the news of his election. You tell me, what can be done?
Well, the point is, this is a Herculean task.
Got that right.
And I don't think there's just one thing that can be done. The point is that we have a situation where it's very difficult because of the success of the ruling class here to maintain white supremacy in all its forms as we have today. So people do not vote necessarily in their interests, and they have to really start thinking that maybe we have to do something different.
Listen, folks, as usual, when I have Mr. Straharm on my show, the time just pours out. He will be back, number one. And number two, let me say something very quickly. It's not about white supremacy or black supremacy. It's about humanity. It's about being an American and what we want our country to stand for. Do we want our country to stand for what took place down in Charlottesville? Or do we want to try to be our best selves? As Lincoln said, we need to listen to the better angels of our nature. And we need to work on it very hard. Listen, this is Robert Gumbs with my guest, Mr. David Strong. We thank you for tuning in, and I will be back next weekend, same time, same channel. Have a great weekend, folks. The Concerned Forum wishes you good night. It's sad, man. It's truly sad.
Yeah, you brought us some good points.
It was truly sad. Oh, I wanted to tell you. Hang on one second. Let me see if I can take care of this. I turn this off here.